Get the cream, precious metals or the crypto things. Your bars are light like the one that's on a Smith machine. But my Maxwell and I ain't speaking about the pretty wings. Watch it.
Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. This is your host, MagMongoSlade. Today, we're going to be talking about Rich and Shameless, a TNT documentary series in which they feature rich people in terrible situations. They had an episode called Hulk Hogan versus Gawker, or the Hulk Hogan sex tape / N-word drama. Now, since I didn't follow this that much at the time that it was occurring, I didn't know a lot about this. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I did on a live stream, we listened to Bubba the Love Sponge tell the story about how Hulk Hogan came to be having sex with his wife, Heather Clem. Now, I watched this episode and I learned a lot more about the scenarios, the different people involved, etc. So we're going to go through this a little bit, and then I'm going to give my thoughts at the end of the episode. So I'm going to skip all the background information on Hulk Hogan. We're all wrestling fans. We know about Hulk Hogan. That should be no big of a deal. 2007 is where things start to really kind of become weird because Linda and Hulk Hogan get a divorce. Apparently Hulk Hogan had been having an affair with one of Brooke Hogan's friends. So this would be a young girl, apparently. And Hogan gets financially destroyed. So the details were left out of the episode, but I'm going to give you some details. It says from the eonline.com, because the original report cannot be found. It was from the St. Petersburg Times. It says Hogan's former wife received a little more than 70% of the couple's liquid assets, along with 40% ownership in his various companies. He also paid her an additional $3 million in property settlements, which was partly pocketed from the sale of their beach house. The paper reports Linda received $7.4 million of the couple's $10.4 million held in the bank and investment accounts, but Hulk will not pay her any alimony. Linda also got to keep a Mercedes-Benz, a Cadillac Escalade, a Corvette, a Rolls-Royce, and various off-road vehicles. Her ex, who allegedly has a fine collection of vehicles, kept the rest, but they aren't identified in the agreement. So she absolutely destroyed him. She took 70% of his liquid assets and then 40% of all his other assets, which, he's not dead broke, but he didn't do very well either. Now, the divorce got pretty ugly. Linda started going on a media tour talking about her relationship with Hulk, and Hogan admitted to the infidelities, but said that their relationship was essentially over at the time. Now, in a bit of irony, Linda, at the time of this article in ABC News, which was in August of 2009, she was also dating one of Brooke's friends, a male friend of Brooke's that she started to date, who is 30 years younger than she was. Now, I don't know if they're still married or anything like that. But the interesting bit is that, and they didn't talk about this in the episode either, so I'm, again, going a little off the beaten path. In this article, they talked about Hulk Hogan's temper. Because Linda was saying how she was afraid of Hulk and she wasn't sure what he was going to do. And she was afraid of him. And Hulk says, I could have turned into OJ, cutting everybody's throat. You live half a mile from a $20,000 square foot home you can't go to anymore. You're driving through downtown Clearwater and you see a 19-year-old boy driving your Escalade. And you know that a 19-year-old boy is sleeping in your bed with your wife. I mean, I totally understand OJ. I get it. That's crazy. That's crazy. All right. And this is what Hulk Hogan said to people in like Rolling Stone magazine. And so that scared Linda, which of course it would. I also understand what he's saying here. You got some kid banging your wife, driving your Escalade. I'd be mad too. So this actually fits into the episode because at this point, Hulk Hogan is left with very little. He's lost a lot, things that he's emotionally attached to. His family is splintered. He was suicidal at some points. And he started hanging out with Bubba the Love Sponge, which is already his friend. Now, Bubba the Love Sponge, for those of you who don't know, was a shock jock in Florida. He, kind of like the Howard Stern of Florida, was really raunchy and over the top with the sex stuff. And it was Bubba the Love Sponge's idea that Hulk Hogan have sex with his wife. So Bubba the Love Sponge says, hey, my best friend is feeling down and out. He was suicidal. He was feeling terrible. I got to do something to make him feel better. How about I hook him up with my wife? So they do this stuff, pretty much a routine sex between Hogan and Bubba the Love Sponge's wife. There's rumors that it had been going on for a while, back and forth. But then the issue comes that it's being recorded. Bubba the Love Sponge is recording Hulk Hogan having sex with his wife. Apparently they had sex more than once because there were multiple video recordings. I think there was 3 discs. I don't know how many minutes were on each disc, but there was at least 3 discs. So they had sex at least 3 times. Each time Bubba the Love Sponge knew about it, and each time he had recorded it. Now in 2011, which was several years after the sex had apparently occurred, Bubba the Love Sponge and his wife got a divorce. Now during this time, a disgruntled employee that they referred to as Spice Boy reportedly went into Bubba the Love Sponge's office and stole these discs. And then he tried to sell them. So he first gave TMZ some of the footage. He also gave a site called The Dirty some of the footage. These sites, these gossip sites, they took screenshots from the sex tape in order to accompany their articles. And this, of course, became a huge disaster. But Gawker took it to the next level. They actually posted about 1 minute and 30 seconds of the sex tape accompanying an article by a guy named AJ Derulo. So at this point, they're telling the story of how sex tapes have become sort of ubiquitous at the time. Started with Pamela Anderson, I believe it was the late 90s, and then it became Paris Hilton and Kim Kardashian, and people were R. Kelly was another one. I'm going to be honest, I never really was a big fan of celebrity sex tapes. And I never seen the Hulk Hogan one, thank God. So they were talking about that. Basically, it was a culture around them. And that's the culture that they were operating in. Like, sex tapes is what we talked about. That's what we did. So this AJ Derulo guy wrote an article in which he posted about 1 minute of the video. And then he wrote an accompanying article. I'm going to skip through the article, but this is the important piece. He says, up top, you'll see 1 minute from the 30 minutes of footage taken of 59-year-old Hulk Hogan, professional wrestler, real-life American hero to many, fucking a woman rumored to be the ex-wife of his best friend, a famous radio DJ named Bubba the Love Sponge. This footage was stealthily circulated last April. TMZ reported its existence. The Dirty showed some screenshots, and Hulk lawyered up because he claims he was, quote, secretly filmed. Last week, a burned DVD copy of Hulk having sex with the woman, rumored to be Heather Clem, was delivered to us through an anonymous source. They wanted no payment. They wanted no credit. Their only request was that we watch it, so I did. All 30 minutes of it, and hyperbole aside, it's a goddamn masterpiece. So he goes through detail about Hulk Hogan having sex with this woman. And but here's the interesting thing. He says after Hulk Hogan apparently performed oral on this lady, he says, then another man's voice can be heard from inside the room off camera, and both Hulk and the naked woman engage in idle chit-chat with the mystery man. Because the woman closely resembles Miss Clem, some have suggested the voice of the mystery man is in fact Bubba the Love Sponge. If this is true, Bubba has no problem sharing his wife with his best friend. You guys do your thing, the man says. I'll be in the office if you need me. He exits and allows Hulk and this woman their privacy. Hulk and the woman engage in more chit-chat, and Bubba's name is mentioned. The woman says, we just fucked earlier today. Hulk says, who? You and him? She laughs. It doesn't matter. Then he goes through the entire thing of them having sex. He goes through excruciating detail. It's really ridiculous, the detail he went into when it comes to this. And it's awful. So it's truly awful what Hulk Hogan has to go through and how these guys are running his name in the mud. So according to the talking heads from Gawker that was in this episode, Hulk Hogan was considered a washed up pro wrestler, not really worth talking about outside of the sex tape. But since it was a sex tape featuring somebody who is ubiquitous in American culture, somebody as popular as Hulk Hogan, it was newsworthy. So the article and the video they felt was perfectly fine for consumption. Now, things began to get a little weird when at a particular point in time, a judge actually ordered Gawker to take down the video. So it says, this is from an article called, "A Judge Told Us to Take Down Our Hulk Hogan Sex Tape Post. We Won't." It says yesterday, which would be on a Wednesday, at some point, they didn't have a year here. It says, Honorable Pamela A.M. Campbell, a circuit court judge in Pinellas County, Florida, issued an order compelling Gawker to remove from the internet a video of Hulk Hogan fucking his best friend's wife, as well as a 1,400-word narrative of the video written by former Gawker editor A.J. Darulio and 466 user-submitted comments. Here is why we are refusing to comply. Then he give a list of reasons why they are refusing to do this. He says, it continues, "We publish all manners of stories here. Some are serious, some are frivolous, some are dumb. I am not going to make a case that the future of the Republic rises or falls on the ability of the general public to watch a video of Hulk Hogan fucking his friend's ex-wife. But the Constitution does unambiguously accord us the right to publish true things about public figures. And Campbell's order requiring us to take down not only a very brief, highly edited video excerpt from a 30-minute Hulk Hogan fucking session, but also a lengthy written account from someone who had watched the entirety of that fucking session is risible and contemptuous of centuries of First Amendment jurisprudence." So on First Amendment grounds, they refuse to take it down. So Hulk Hogan argues that he had a right to privacy at some point in his life, and that since he didn't know that he was being recorded, that this was a violation of the privacy rights, which of course supersedes the First Amendment. So Gawker then argues that because Hulk Hogan had done Howard Stern and Bubba the Love Sponge in various interviews talking about his sex life, and he had done the reality TV show, which also delved a little bit into his sex life, that his sex life was fair game. Now, there was a little aside to this, because here comes the extortion part. Now, in order to learn a little bit more about the extortion, we got to back up until where the discs were actually stolen. So this is from the Smoking Gun, which did an extensive piece on this guy named Keith Davidson, who was an attorney involved with this situation. We'll get into who he is in a second. And it says, quote, "The source of the Hogan leaks to TMZ and The Dirty was Matthew Spice Boy Lloyd, an ex-intern who became a Clem co-host and grew to dislike the shock jock. Lloyd says he found the Hogan sex tapes inside of a movie box that he purchased at an annual garage sale fundraiser organized by Clem. Law enforcement officials who later investigated how Lloyd got the DVDs concluded that he swiped them from Clem's office and planned to sell the explicit videos." Then it says, Lloyd, however, has never been charged with stealing the material. Lloyd contacted TMZ first because he had previously dealt with Walters on stories about Clem, the Bubba the Love Sponge show, and Hogan, who was a regular Clem guest. Hogan and his family were often the subject of TMZ stories and videos, especially after the wrestler's son Nick was arrested in 2007 for a street racing crash that critically injured a passenger in the car he was driving. So this guy stole the tapes, was never, ever actually brought up on charges, but here's how he got caught. He contacted an attorney named Keith Davidson, and Keith Davidson apparently just does this. They contact people and try to sell them damaging material back to them, and it's very, very bizarre, and it should be, if in all honesty, illegal. So to facilitate this sale, this goes to the Smoking Gun. It says Lloyd first called Davidson on October the 10th, a day after TMZ published Walters' story on the Hogan sex tapes. Walters is a writer for TMZ who wrote the initial story about the Hulk Hogan sex tapes. It says, before dialing the number, Lloyd blocked his Florida number. Davidson made a persuasive pitch to Lloyd about his experience handling similar sex tape matters. Vouched for by Walters, Davidson seemed like a, quote, big swinging dick attorney from Beverly Hills who, quote, talked a big game, said Lloyd. Believing that any future sale of the Hogan tapes would be, quote, completely legal thing, negotiated by a lawyer who, quote, does this all the time, Lloyd hired Davidson. The plan was for Davidson to try and negotiate a settlement with Hogan's representatives while keeping the identity of his client secret. But from the outset of Davidson's representation, Lloyd said there were red flags. When Lloyd told Davidson that he bought the sex tapes at a Clem garage sale, the lawyer rejected that story. Instead, Davidson suggested an alternative account. Lloyd found the videos on a used laptop he had purchased. Lloyd said that wasn't true. The attorney stressed that the laptop story was the one they were using. I was like, okay, maybe this guy knows what he's doing. Lloyd recalled, he's the attorney here. Citing attorney-client restrictions, Davidson would not answer the smoking gun questions about the Hogan sex tape case. After speaking with Lloyd, Davidson immediately contacted David Houston, Hogan's attorney, and emailed with the subject line, Hulk Hogan tape. Davidson asked Hogan's lawyer to, quote, call regarding above. After Houston's assistant replied seeking further information, quote, Mr. Houston is unaware of whom you might be. Davidson explained that he had been asked to represent the, quote, rights holder of the Hogan footage and wanted to discuss the matter. Hogan's lawyer agreed to a phone conversation, but wrote Davidson to say that his client had secretly taped, had never been given consent to video's distribution, and was, quote, distraught over the Gawker leak. The two lawyers spoke multiple times over the next few days. In subsequent sworn testimony and interviews with federal investigators, Houston said that Davidson described the Gawker leak as a, quote, warning shot fired by his clients. That's crazy, right? That's just insane. It was just a warning shot that we're going to ruin your career. So then it says, quote, 5 days after receiving Davidson's initial email, Hogan and Houston, whose office is in Reno, Nevada, traveled to the FBI office in Clearwater, Florida. Hogan detailed his sexual encounters with Heather Clem and assured agents that the sex tape leak was not a publicity stunt. The wrestler said that he wanted to, quote, prosecute whoever did this, according to an FBI memo. Houston told the agents about his contacts with Davidson. The Beverly Hills attorney, he said, quote, claimed that the possessors of the tapes obtained them legally as they purchased a laptop which contained said images and tapes. Houston also said that Davidson told him that Hogan used racial epithets in one tape and that if the video was released, it would damage the wrestler's career. On the same day that Hogan and Houston met with the FBI, the wrestler sued Gawker for $100 million, charging that the posting of the sex tape excerpt was an invasion of privacy that left him humiliated and stricken with severe emotional distress. So, of course, the lawsuit is kicking in at this point. The lawsuit went on for a little while, but I like to focus on the extortion element of this because the lawsuit gets real legally mumbo jumbo, First Amendment versus privacy rights, which we can talk about that if you really want to, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But the extortion element of it is pretty clear cut, right? So here comes the cynical element. It says, it seems just as likely, however, that Hogan's lawsuit was an attempt to halt any future release of the N-word video. Though through conversations with Davidson and apparently Walters too, Houston and Hogan already knew of the damaging video's existence. In an October 12th text to a friend, a concerned Hogan wrote, quote, there's more than one tape out there, and a one that has several racial slurs, we're told. After consulting with the FBI prosecutor, FBI agents opened an extortion investigation targeting Davidson. One day after Hogan and Houston filed their in-person complaint, Houston gave agents his email correspondence with Davidson and agreed to record phone conversations with the California attorney. These conversations were published in the documentary, so you actually got to hear these two talking to each other, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. It says, as he commenced cooperating with the FBI, Houston had no idea that Walters, a valuable source of information for Hogan's team, was responsible for connecting Davidson with Lloyd, possessor of the sex tapes. So these conversations go on for a while. It says, quote, in a series of calls recorded over 2 months, some of which he placed from an FBI field office, Houston pretended to negotiate an actual settlement with Davidson. Transcripts of the calls provide a glimpse into Davidson's approach in handling a deal for sex tapes, which he referred to as, quote, the product in one call. The transcripts also show Houston, who has practiced since 1978 trying to lead Davidson into making incriminating statements, but Davidson remained circumspect, issued none of the, quote, veiled threats that Houston attributed to him during their initial conversations, which were not taped. So this might be how they managed to escape extortion, is that Hogan's attorney, that would be this Davidson fellow, was the one who was trying to lead the conversations towards more incriminating information. And David Houston was a little bit smarter than the average bear and was not going to repeat some of the threats that he made in the previous unrecorded conversations that they'd had. And then it says, quote, Davidson told Houston, quote, I've been a fan of your client for years, adding that Hogan, quote, seems like just a really, really nice guy who is going through a really bad part in his life, after declaring, quote, I hope that you and I are dealing in a professional way that is truthful, open, candid. Davidson told Houston it was, quote, not my intention here to hold anybody over the fire. You know, I hope I'm part of the solution here. At one point, Davidson even described one of Hogan's encounters with Heather Clem, quote, the sex is pretty straight. I mean, there's nothing that would be even remotely unusual or fetish-like. So over the next 2 months, these two people are having a conversation, negotiating whether these guys are going to sell this sex tape back to Hogan. Now, in the episode, you can hear Hogan's voice at one point, as Hogan is concerned about whether these are the original tapes or whether they're recordings or anything like that, because that's part of the negotiation. You can't just say, well, I have tapes or I have these CDs or whatever, because if they're not the original, somebody can just make copies of them, right? So we continue the article. It says, in one recorded call, Davidson pushed Houston to commence monetary negotiations. All right, I'll say $1. Hogan's lawyer said. Davidson, who chuckled at the opening offer, responded, well, I think that we would counter with $1 million. So this thing was going on for so long without even mentioning money. So Hogan's attorney was the one who decided that he was going to mention a dollar figure, which is probably how they managed to beat the extortion attempt if they are offering. But this guy, he contacted you saying we have this sensitive information. It's clearly that he wants money. What else would he possibly want? But it continues. As the lawyers eventually hammered out the final details of the $300,000 settlement agreement, Davidson balked at certain language proposed by Houston, whose efforts negotiating the sham agreement were being overseen by the FBI. Quote, you're almost asking my client to admit that she's an extortionist, said Davidson. If my client puts a signature on this, I think that's an admission of criminal wrongdoing. So they don't consider themselves to be an extortionist, even though they're literally extorting people by willing to say, hey, I'll sell you this damaging information. We'll keep it out of the public, even though, we've already sold bits and pieces of it. You'll get the whole thing, but we're not committing extortion here. This is not extortion. This is very strange, right? During his conversations with Houston, Davidson said that his clients were responsible for providing Gawker with the leaked Hogan sex tape. The claim was crucial since it provided some assurance that the tapes being offered for sale were the originals and not the copies. It was also not true, according to Davidson's clients. With Lloyd desiring anonymity, his friend Laurie Burnbridge, whom he previously used to receive $8,500 payment from TMZ, was set to act as the owner of the tapes. Burnbridge, who faced financial problems and just had her car repossessed, agreed to be the straw seller in return for $10,000. Davidson's plan called for Burnbridge to accompany him to a future settlement with Hogan and Houston. So this guy, the actual thief, he finds a friend, a young lady who is in financial trouble, and he says to her, you come stand in my place, you pretend to be the extortionist. So just in case something happens, it falls on you, not me. And if everything goes smooth, I'll give you a cut. But the cut is only $10,000. The cut is only out of a $300,000 deal that he was about to make. Clearly, she probably wouldn't have known it was going to be that much, right? Like, these people are absolute scumbags. Like, we agree on this, right? Like, Hogan might not be an absolute, innocent victim here, but he's clearly a victim here. right? These people clearly are just vultures. Then it says, quote, during a conference call between Davidson, Lloyd, and Burnbridge, the subject of the Gawker leak was discussed. In an interview, Lloyd recalled telling Davidson that he had nothing to do with providing the tape to the website. Davidson, he said, replied, we have to admit it. You won't be held responsible for anything. Burnbridge, in an interview with the state investigator, said that Davidson told her that, quote, I needed to say that I was the one who sold the video to Gawker. She added that Davidson, quote, advised us explicitly that if we didn't claim to have done that, to have sold it to Gawker, that the whole deal wouldn't go through. This is insane. If they did not claim responsibility for the leak, Burnbridge told federal agents the sex tapes would lose their value. So they had to admit to providing Gawker and TMZ with the sex tapes in order to prove the authenticity of the sex tapes, in order to maintain the value of the sex tapes. None of these people got found guilty of extortion, by the way. I keep saying that because no matter how much we get into, realize they were recorded saying this stuff, essentially admitted to doing it, and none of them went to prison. It's insane. Continue. While later describing the conference call with Davidson to FBI agents, Burnbridge said that she asked the lawyer if, quote, the selling of the tapes was extortion. Davidson replied that he had frequently done similar deals and that, quote, the tapes were purchased and the property that is purchased can be legally resold. When an agent asked Burnbridge why he thought to ask Davidson about extortion, she answered that the sex tapes, quote, could hurt Hogan and they were trying to get Hogan to pay for it. Burnbridge, an FBI agent reports, quote, further stated that she understood what extortion to be. So she knows that this is extortion. And then Davidson, who is the attorney here, is telling everybody, it's not extortion. It's not a big deal. I do this stuff all the time. It's like, yeah, sure, you do this all the time, but it's illegal all the time. Every time you do this, it's illegal. So let's skip ahead a little bit because I don't want to bore you with too many details on this thing. It says, with a negotiated agreement in place, Houston and Davidson arranged to meet, along with their respective clients, at the Sand Pearl Resort in Clearwater Beach to close the deal. Davidson, whose contingency fee arrangement called for him to receive 40% of the settlement, which was $120,000 plus expenses, arrived in Florida a day early so that he could meet his clients face-to-face for the first time. Davidson had no idea that a squad of FBI agents was already inside the hotel, outfitting Houston's room with the video cameras and listening devices, or that those agents would be massed in an adjoining room monitoring his deal with Hogan in Houston. So, he was going to get 40% of the deal. And the straw buyer, the chick who is apparently putting her own self at risk, she's only getting 10%. And I'm assuming her 10% was going to come out of Matthew Lloyd's 60%. So, oh my goodness. These people are absolutely evil, bro. These people are evil. Let's skip forward. It says, on the morning of the meeting with Houston, Hogan, Burnbridge, and Davidson had a prep session in his hotel room. Burnbridge later told FBI agents Davidson reminded her of the phony claim about how the tapes were acquired. She had, quote, bought a computer bag which contained the Hogan sex tapes. Davidson, she recalled, said this was a wink-wink, nudge-nudge fashion. Burnbridge described Davidson as a, quote, very adamant of trying to do everything to get the deal to go through, which she thought was, quote, so that he'd get his cut. Burnbridge told law enforcement officials that the lawyer had earlier said, quote, I don't know about you saying you bought it at a garage sale. What about you bought a laptop and it was in there? The location of where the DVDs were purportedly found fluctuated from on a laptop to inside the laptop. While Burnbridge waited out behind, Davidson arrived at Houston's room at 11 a.m. It's good to meet you. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. I bet you were. Later it says, as the meeting progressed, Davidson again confirmed that his client was Gawker's source. He also came under pressure from Houston to answer whether the tapes had been stolen from Clem. At that point, Davidson asked Houston if they could speak in private in the bathroom. Houston agreed. Inside the bathroom, Davidson admitted that the sex tapes came from a former employee of Clem who hated the shock jock. I don't know if they've been stolen, said Davidson, and quite frankly, I don't want to know if they were stolen. So, they had a pretty good idea that these tapes were stolen and still decided to go through with this whole thing. So, let's go a little bit further, because now that we've gotten into the meat of the actual extortion attempt, let's go through this. It says Davidson referred to the ex-Clem employee as Mr. X and said that Burnbridge was acting as the mystery man's representative. After Davidson brought Burnbridge into Houston's room, she told Hogan that Mr. X was behind the Gawker leak. So the answer to this question is, why wasn't the racial stuff released? Burnbridge answered, the intent wasn't to harm you. If that was released, then what is it worth to you as well? In other words, the only value these sex tapes have is the fact that you said something on them that you wasn't supposed to say. That's the part that you're buying. You're not really buying the sex tapes. You're buying that you said racial slurs that was recorded on the sex tapes that then we can sell to you. This is absolutely insane. This is insane. It says, according to an FBI report, Hogan and Houston then went to Davis's room to authenticate the sex tapes while Burnbridge was questioned by a polygrapher, a guy who does lie detector tests. Okay. I'm never going to get that word right. It says, while reviewing the tapes, Houston said Davison made a comment to the effect that, quote, the tapes that were released were the shot over the bow, but not the shot that would take the ship down. A report by the polygrapher, the lie detector guy, quoted Davison saying that he had previously handled 30 similar settlements with, quote, only one going bad. So this ended up going pretty crazy. It says Houston gave Davison a check for $150,000, the first of 3 installment payments. Then the front door kicked open and in flooded FBI agents. Houston and Hogan left, while Davison and Burnbridge were separated by the agents. Burnbridge was bewildered and repeatedly asked whether she was, quote, part of a hoax. She said she thought it was a hoax. Then she says she also wondered whether it was a bit for Lloyd's radio show. After assuring her that the raiding party was composed of legitimate lawmen, an FBI agent read Burnbridge her rights. She then agreed to cooperate with the agents and began by saying, quote, the most important thing the FBI needed to know was that she and Lloyd were not responsible for the leaking of the sex tape to Gawker. She said that the false claim was necessary in order to complete the negotiations with Hogan and Houston. Oh my God. How much more crazy could this possibly be? Now we get to the meat of the matter from my ends, because I was very enamored with the extortion part. And I wanted to know how they managed to not get charges filed against them. That's what I wanted to know. So this Smoking Gun article, which I have been reading so far, and it's most of it, they're going to explain how they managed to beat the case. It says Davison quickly hired Brian Albrechtsen, a white-collar defense attorney who once served as a United States attorney for the judicial district that includes the Tampa-St. Pete area. Albrechtsen would compile a 58-page presentation for federal prosecutors that described Davison as, quote, an ethical and trustworthy attorney who negotiated a legitimate commercial deal with Hogan's lawyer, a transaction that was absent, quote, any threat or similar coercive inducement. So we weren't trying to threaten or coerce him in any way to buy the sex tapes from us. We just told him that we had them and then had all these secret meetings and all this kind of stuff, right? So then it says Alberton also contended that a prosecution of Davison might turn into a publicity vehicle for Clem and Hogan, both of whom would likely be called as government witnesses, arguing that a criminal trial over the Hogan sex tapes would promote, quote, disrespect for federal law enforcement. Alberton concluded that the public would view, quote, any such prosecution as a waste of taxpayer dollars and a wish a pox on both Hulk Hogan and Bubba the Love Sponge. For good measure, Albertin included a page detailing some of the shock jock's more vile radio outrages. The page was headlined, Bubba Brings the Circus, a history of obscenity and lies. Albertin was unaware at the time that the Clem's untruths also included his claim during an FBI interview that Hogan was aware he was being recorded having sex with the shock jock's wife. Clem was never charged for this lie to federal agents. Now, pause before we get to the part where we actually explain what happened. Hulk Hogan did sue Bubba the Love Sponge and his wife for the recording of these tapes. Bubba the Love Sponge then went public and said that Hulk Hogan knew he was being recorded, which of course, if he knew he was being recorded, then his privacy rights were not violated. It turns out that this was false. Hulk Hogan did not know he was being recorded. And then Bubba the Love Sponge, after all of this stuff happened, him and Hogan settled out of court or something like that. He had to come out and admit that he lied, not only to the public, but also to federal agents about whether Hulk Hogan knew he was being recorded or not. In other words, Hulk Hogan did not know he was being recorded by Bubba the Love Sponge. This sick fuck who went on television saying, my only part of this story was I hooked my friend up with my wife. I had no problem with that. You also recorded them, you sick son of a bitch. And then lied and said he knew about it, which could have ruined his case with Gawker because you didn't want your friend to be mad at you. These people are sick, man. This is some sick shit. All right, let's get back to this article because I know everybody wants to know, how did they beat this case, this extortion case? I'm just so concerned with this. After 7 months reviewing the evidence against Davidson, federal prosecutors decided not to file charges against the lawyer. The Department of Justice did not comment on what factors contribute to such declinations. Houston argued that the government lawyers, quote, had more than ample evidence to prosecute Davidson. Quote, that's a conspiracy in anybody else's county or district. Hogan's attorney declared, quote, for some reason, Florida, I guess that doesn't amount to a conspiracy. So it was just the federal prosecutors decided not to file charges. Now, I would guess that he probably got leaned on for some other stuff. That this was considered small potatoes and that, maybe they could use him for something else. So I would imagine that anybody who did business with this guy after this point was probably set up. And I come to that agreement because basically that's how drug dealing works. If you get busted with tons of drugs and then you out back on the street and they got clear evidence that you did something and they just let you go, 9 times out of 10 it's because you're a rat. Now, I'm guessing that's what this was here. He's probably a rat somehow. But it wasn't just that. It was also the sort of ridiculous nature of Bubba the Love Sponge that he had pretty much lied in public so much and done so many terrible things to people that he wasn't a good witness. So the article contends that there was people who wanted to prosecute the case, but one of the questions was whether the jurors would even care. Like the jurors would be, take a day off work or whatever and have to sit here and listen to whether Hulk Hogan knew he was being recorded by some guy who lies repeatedly all the time and was also lying. He already lied to the federal investigators and nobody knew it yet. And basically it was a waste of everybody's time, so they dropped it. But I can guarantee you that this dude was probably leaned on and flipped in some other cases. And interestingly enough, this Keith Davidson fellow was involved with the Donald Trump Stormy Daniels buyout. He was involved with that too. Funny how that works out, right? This guy just happened to be involved with both of these things. It was sick, So Hogan wins a $140 million settlement against Gawker, which of course bankrupted the company. Now, the conversation, of course, leaned on whether Hulk Hogan had a right to privacy or the First Amendment, which Gawker's claim is the First Amendment. This brings us to the lawsuit, which was actually the funny part, because this was the only part of the lawsuit I ever remembered. was Hulk Hogan being on the stand talking about the delineation between Terry Bollea and Hulk Hogan. And whenever he was on television as Hulk Hogan, anything that he said as Hulk Hogan was about Hulk Hogan. So when he goes on television talking about his 10-inch dick, he's talking about Hulk Hogan's 10-inch dick. Terry Bollea does not have a 10-inch dick, which of course everybody found to be absolutely hilarious and is the running gag. Anytime we talk about Hogan and Gawker, it's Hogan's creation of the Hulk Hogan mythos and how Hulk Hogan has, the biggest penis in the world, brother. But Terry Bollea doesn't have a 10-inch cock, which is, it was described by AJ Darulio as a child's thermos. That's how it was. This guy, these people are like crazy, right? Anyway, the Gawker, of course, make the argument that Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, like what difference does it make? You make these public comments, and Hulk Hogan was like, hey, I do this stuff all the time as Hulk Hogan. When I was behind closed doors, I was Terry Bollea. That's who I am. And Terry Bollea has privacy rights. Hulk Hogan is a public figure. He's a fictional character, yada, yada, yada. Now, he ended up winning, of course, $140 million. They talked about Peter Thiel, who was the tech billionaire who funded this whole thing for Hulk Hogan, and how that guy was angry because Gawker had outed him as being gay in 2007. And he was pretty pissed about that and decided he was going to help destroy Gawker. So his part in this whole thing was minor. He was just basically a financier. But the interesting bit to the Hulk Hogan defense was that anything I said publicly is Hulk Hogan, but anything I said privately is Terry Bollea. But when he was going off about the racist shit, that was Terry Bollea. So once the racist parts of the tape started coming out, he can't hide behind I was just in character, brother. No. That was you, right? So now the delineation is Hulk Hogan is not a racist. Terry Bollea is a racist. How weird is that? It doesn't matter at this point, right? If Terry Bollea is a racist, then Hulk Hogan is a racist too. Anything that Terry Bollea is, Hulk Hogan has to be that. Because nobody's going to separate the two. No one's going to look at television and say, yeah, I love me some Hulk Hogan. I hate Terry Bollea, but I love me some Hulk Hogan. Nobody's going to do that. Now, in terms of the privacy rights versus the First Amendment. Look, I'm a First Amendment absolutist, but when you are in a situation of a policy paradox between rights, your right to privacy and the media's right to, report things, you do have some rights. They can't use stolen information. We just went through this with Hunter Biden, right? And people said, oh, the laptop was stolen. And then some people said, no, the laptop was left behind and in this place or that place or whatever. It became a question of not whether it's really Hunter Biden on these videos, but how were the videos attained? Because if they were stolen, then it's a violation of his privacy rights and we can't use that stuff. You have no right to even talk about it. And this is what led to all of the sites taking all that stuff down right during the election. Now, all of us, more of us cynically political individuals were like, how suspicious that, just as Hunter Biden got busted snorting crack and all this kind of stuff on video, all that stuff was taken down. But understand, they were arguing under the position that the laptop was stolen. So they're saying this stuff was stolen. Therefore, even though we can all see it and the videos are there and the screenshots are there, it's not legal. So we have to all pretend that we didn't see it. You have to wave your magic wand and we didn't see it, right? Which is bullshit because we did see it, But that's the difference between a legal system and a justice system. A legal system has written laws. You have to follow the law. And in following the law, if something is stolen and then released to the public, we can all say, okay, now you can't prosecute anybody for this kind of stuff. You can't investigate them for it. But socially, we can all see it. So Hulk Hogan was socially destroyed for something he did in private, where he had an expectation of privacy. He was in a place he had the right to be in, were doors that were closed. It was in the dark, if I remember correctly. It was not meant for public consumption. He was not using the Hulk Hogan gimmick or anything like that. It was not released as part of any type of publicity stunt or anything to that effect. It was about his private life, his private feelings. He was going through a very difficult time. He has the right to that. If Hulk Hogan would have lost, the argument would have been that if you're a celebrity, you have no privacy rights whatsoever. Even behind closed doors, you have no privacy rights, which is bullshit. I don't believe that just because you become a public figure, all of a sudden everything that you ever has done in your life needs to be public. I don't buy that. That people still need to have private lives. And there needs to be things that other people don't need to know about. So I'm glad Hulk Hogan won. I'm glad Gawker got destroyed, even though I know Gawker is back today. Revenge porn is a thing that is knowledgeable now. There's episodes of Law and Order SVU about it, but none of it is about how men are sometimes the victim of revenge porn, which Hulk Hogan apparently was. This guy, this Matthew Lloyd, it wasn't about Hulk Hogan personally. He was mad at Bubba the Love Sponge. And he finds out that Hulk Hogan was banging his wife. And I guess he figured he was going to embarrass Bubba the Love Sponge. But Bubba the Love Sponge wasn't embarrassed by that. It ended up being Hulk Hogan and Bubba the Love Sponge's wife that was embarrassed by this. So they were collateral damage in a situation in which this guy was mad at another guy. That's terrible. But it was a really good episode. I mean, I wouldn't watch this show regularly. The only reason I watched it was because I saw Hulk Hogan. So I was like, hey, what is Hulk Hogan doing here? And I didn't know that much about the Gawker thing, but now I know way too much about it. The Smoking Gun article is actually a Keith Davidson article. If you wanted to read it yourself, you want to read the whole thing, go to smokinggun.com, click the download for it. Other articles I use were various news websites or whatever. So I think I went through this thing with a little bit more detail than I intended to, but there are other videos on this from people who are a lot more professional than I am. I just, like to talk about things and maybe read an article or two. But have you guys saw this documentary? If so, let me know what you guys thought. I thought it was good. They cut out a lot of the details, but I did like that they showed footage of Hulk Hogan training. They showed some footage from his time in Georgia Championship Wrestling, sometime from his debut in 1979. I didn't know that there was a children's Hulk Hogan workout set that apparently exists. And I didn't know that. So it was very cool to see that. And so it was some really cool wrestling stuff in here too. But that would be like in the first 10 to 15 minutes of the show. The rest of it is about the Gawker scenario and his divorce and everything. So hopefully you guys maybe got a refresher if you knew all about this. Maybe you knew sort of the details of it, but you didn't know a lot. Maybe now you know a little bit more, hopefully, or maybe you just enjoyed me talking about something on wrestling related that I found on television. And anyway, thank you guys for your time. I'll talk to you guys later. But peace out.
Tell me what's worse than learning all that you led to believe was all horse crap.